Hi, everybody. Danny Taylor here from the YOLO Home Team. And I am so excited that we have Samuel Calvo here from the Calvo Law Group. Samuel focuses, or his specialty is in real estate law. And Sam, thank you so much for taking time to spend with us to
My
have like
pleasure.
an intro here. So, Sam, look, I usually have a couple of questions and then make one or two kind of personal questions, not too personal, don't worry, just so that people can kind of get to know you and get a feel for who you are. And Sam and I have spoken briefly before the podcast, and I'm so excited to introduce him to you all in hopes if you have any needs in the real estate area that you will think of Samuel as one of your go-to attorneys. So, Sam, let me ask you a question. There are so many changes within real estate, the laws. We have a difficult time keeping up with them, paperwork, all the disclosures, everything. I guess one of the areas that I have um, I don't know how this all happened, but a lot of my clients are either estate sales or divorce situations. So I guess let me just start with the estate side. Um, how does property trust factor into estate planning, and how can it benefit clients?
So good question. For a variety of reasons, either for family estate planning, uh, for example, the grandfather way back had a lot of money, wanted to give it to his children in a tax beneficial way, and so he or she, of course, would set up a trust for the children, the grandchildren. That being said, oftentimes when a trust is selling years later, generations later, the original people aren't around. So it's really important to kind of like dive in and review that trust agreement. Well, what did they provide for? What were they trying to do? And can it be done? And certainly the vehicle of creating the trust and then having essentially giving it to your kids is great, but sometimes it's like, oh, what happened 50 years ago,
Right.
So always very interesting.
I guess to that point, and it just occurred to me as you were talking, because as I expressed, a lot of my clients are either, have property in trust, or divorce situations. What is your recommendation regarding, if people do get divorced, and how, the ex-spouses, if you will, allocate, property in the future? Because a lot of times there will be a will in place, and then a divorce might occur. Do any changes need to happen after the judgment of divorce comes in, or can you are you able to create a trust after you sign the stipulation? At what should something be put in place, and I guess at what point should that happen?
So good question. A judgment of divorce, it's almost like a deed. So you don't have to then do another property transfer. That's true. However, what's good about wills is when you make a new will, it nullifies a prior will. There's no drawback of making a new will and updating it again. So, of course, whenever your situation changes, definitely speak to a real estate attorney, but really an estate planner, a trust and estates attorney to update your wills based on your family situation. It could be divorce, but it could be for, nice, happy things, new children,
Yeah,
remarriage, things of that nature.
yeah. That's true. Birth of a child or birth of grandchildren, maybe people might want to make modifications based on new births, right? That's interesting. Okay. So, what are some common mistakes that people make when including real estate in their wills? What are some of the things that you think people do that they shouldn't be doing?
That's a great question because I was talking about this with my staff the other day. Uh, oftentimes I think it's a lack of education. That's what it is. In real estate, and chime in if you have any questions on this. real estate can operate outside of the will. So, for example, let's say me and my spouse, we own property together as tenants by the entirety. I hope we live, very long and healthy lives. But if anything happens to me, ownership automatically goes to my spouse by operation of law. You can have a will that provides for other assets and things like that, but the real estate component can operate without the will. So oftentimes people will draft their estate documents and maybe they are adamant on how the will has to appear, even though their professionals are telling them, well, no, don't put this in the will, right? So
Yeah,
oftentimes the mistake could be just really aggressive clients and maybe the attorney that's not saying, no, it has to, trust me, this is how it has to get done. But I
right,
think it's that lack of education where the will says one thing, but the property's transferring by operation of law otherwise. So there's
right,
a disconnect between the documents.
right. So here we go. Was actually in a situation where my dad's home I actually changed title over to my stepmom, and then she
Mhm.
wanted to create a will. And so revocable or irrevocable trusts, do you think are, the best way to handle these situations?
So that's really a loaded question. There is a lot of play when it comes to financing. Oftentimes, when you buy property, the bank is more wary of revocable trust because you could set something in place and then you could change it, and then the lender said, "Hey, I didn't sign up for this," and the lender
Right,
can owns a significant portion of the real estate. So buying as a trust more difficult if it's revocable because things can change. That being said, of course, if you own free and clear without a lender, you get a little more latitude. But essentially, the word just means what it could do. Revocable means that the trust can change. You can take it back. Irrevocable means no, it's going to be like this for.
all of eternity. So
Mhm.
are there any downfalls to putting an irrevocable trust in place, aside from the person not potentially having the ability to change their mind? I mean, are there any other downfalls that you would want to make people aware of?
I would say if that's part of your plan, if that's part of your estate planning and your desires, I wouldn't say there's any drawback on it.
Right. Okay. Okay. So are there any specific legal protections for surviving spouses in real estate?
Well, yeah. Well, in New York, even if you don't have your spouse on the deed, you get the 50,000 up front and then the remaining third of the estate. So you can't really deed out your spouse. There's also a host of other issues. In New Jersey, for example, if the residence was the marital residence, there's also other protections as well. Of course, caveat, speak to your estate planners to get the exact, to double check me on that. But
Yeah.
there are protections. I believe it's 50K and a third of the assets of the property. So you
Wow.
can't,
I wasn't aware of
yeah.
that. That's interesting.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
does it vary it varies by state, correct or no?
Yes, it does. It
Okay.
does.
All right.
Yeah.
Uh,
So consult your local. I focus on real estate. Of course, it bleeds into estate and trust matters.
yeah.
But when it comes to things of this nature, speak to like you said, I think maybe it was before the call, you always like attorneys that focus on one thing. For me, it's all real estate. It bleeds into the sister fields like estate planning. But for a particular question for estate planning, definitely would recommend speak to the expert.
Okay. And here's a really good question. I mean, look, as a real estate professional, liens and open permits are my enemy, right? So
Mhm.
I'm always trying to ensure that I have as much information as possible prior to going down that sales process, just so that everyone is aware of where we are and the status of the home. So let me ask you a question. For the buyers, what would you say, what steps that should a buyer take if they encounter a lien on their property?
Mhm. You're saying a lien or just open permits as well?
Lien.
Okay. Well, Lean, you know, I'm smiling because the first thing to do is tell your attorney to speak to the seller's attorney to make sure that lien gets off record as soon as possible. I'll tell you, it's a little bit of a nuance. If the seller, of course, has a mortgage, a regular mortgage with Chase, Wells Fargo, TD, etc., so simply before closing, they'll arrange to get a payoff, and then everyone's happy. But oftentimes, a lien comes up like a tax lien or a judgment
Janice
lien, list
Lane.
pendants, things like
Yeah.
that. And that could take time to get it off record. Right when you're aware of that, it could take weeks, hopefully not more than that, but it can take several weeks to get to the bottom of it, to get to speak to the appropriate department, to get a payoff letter, etc. So the first thing is right when that title report comes in, and really it's on the attorney's end, but see if there's any wonky liens and make sure the seller's attorney is attacking that as soon as possible.
Okay. And here's a question regarding on like commercial. All right. So you know you have tenants that sign a binding contract with a landlord. Um, what I would assume, I know that it depends on the contract specifically, but generally speaking, how much time would a landlord have to give a tenant if they needed, for whatever reason, to, let's say, spontaneously ask them to leave the premises earlier than which the contract would allow for? How would that work?
It's always a tricky situation. If a tenant has a lease that has an end date certain, for example, the lease is over, January 31st, 2027. Really, if the tenant doesn't want to leave, there's not much you could do besides doing like a cash for keys agreement, basically paying the tenant to leave early. That's that. Many times, especially in the city, many tenants are month-to-month tenants,
Hmm.
or they don't have a lease. And if you don't have a lease, it's understood that the tenant is a month-to-month tenant. So the rule is in New York, you have to give a month plus. So, for example, let's say right now today is January 24th. So you could say, I'm giving you notice and you have to leave by the end of February. That's good. That would be a sufficient notice, a month plus,
And that's for month to month lease.
month to month, or in the absence of a lease.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and of course they don't leave right away,
Yep.
unfortunately. So then,
Yep.
but then with that, if you've done the notice correctly in accordance to the rules and the procedures, etc., you could start an eviction case.
Yep. Okay. Um, so let's get on to a couple of personal questions, just two.
Sure.
Okay, so how long have you been practicing for?
I've been practicing since 2013.
Okay, and what was it about real estate law that was intriguing to you, or what was the impetus for you to move forward in this field specifically?
I think not that real estate's friendly and litigation is not friendly. It's not so simple like that. But there is an aspect of teamwork. The seller wants to get money and the buyer wants to get property. And the attorneys, of course, brokers as well, even bankers, title reps, we all kind of have to work together, share information, share knowledge, and get to the bottom line. So it's really collaborative. And I like that. I like working as a team with everyone to fulfill everyone's goals.
Yeah. And I guess my question for you is, um, again, another kind of personal question.
Sure.
What do you have in your life now that your 6 year old self would have died for?
Wow, that's a great question. Hmm. That's a good question. I'm gonna have to answer uh, a basement to play with toys,
That is so funny. That is hysterical. It's oh, I you know I usually get some form of that answer, especially from a guy, if you will. A basement
Okay.
full of toys. That's awesome. And
Yeah.
what do you have in your life today that your 100-year-old self would miss?
Hmm. I think just the health and the ability to come to work every day. It's a simple thing, but the ability to wake up, put your clothes on, get your bag, take the subway, come to the office. And, some people think that's monotonous and dreary, or it's like Groundhog's Day, every day's the same. But to me, I think that's a beautiful blessing that you come in, that you're here in the world to do something.
Yeah, I agree. And I think once you don't have that ability, you suddenly realize the blessings that you have or what you could have been grateful for. Um, for all of our followers, and just to kind of give you a little bit more color to what we do on the YOLO Home Team. 12 years ago, I created a foundation called the YOLO Strong Foundation. And it was three of us girls, and basically we compete in obstacle course races and marathons to raise money for medically fragile and terminally ill children. We were invited to California to be in the studio audience of the Ellen Show. We met Dr. Oz. We just do everything that we can to try to get the word out that we're professional women taking time out to use our bodies, if you will, to raise funds for medically fragile and terminally ill children. And then about 2.5 years ago, I got my license and built the team up. And now we're a team of 8. And basically, every time we buy or sell a home, a portion of those sales proceeds benefit the YOLO Strong Foundation. So we are the YOLO Home Team, but we help the YOLO Strong Foundation in helping families in need. So if you would keep us in mind, if you come across any of your clients that are in a situation where there's some financial distress due to a sick child, we would love it if you kept us in mind because we're always trying to share our mission statement with all the professionals that we work with. So I think health is something that I don't think people shout from the rooftops that they take for granted. But what I will say is that the whole reason why we created the foundation to begin with was we realized that we were lucky because our children were healthy. And there are other parents out there that aren't in the same situation. And sometimes, one parent can't even work anymore because, they have to be home with the child. So we do everything that we can to try to help these families. So that's what we do here at the YOLO Home Team. I really do appreciate your time. Thank you so, so much. I would love it if we could spend a little bit more time in our office once we get the podcast studio up and running. I know that you're in
Definitely.
Manhattan, so it might be a little bit of a trek, but I'm sure we
Not at
could figure
all.
something out.
Happy to
Um,
come by.
yeah, that'd be wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody, everyone who's following us. This is Danny Taylor from the YOLO Home Team here with Sam Calvo, the Calvo Law Group. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And we will definitely be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Thanks for having me on, and thanks everyone for listening.
Bye bye.